We're going to talk some Chiefs tonight. We're going to talk some Royals. We're going to talk Kansas City sports across the board. Before we start, I just want to talk a little bit. This program continues and extends a partnership that we love having with the Star, with the Kansas City Star. For almost a year now, we've collaborated on What's Your KCQ, which invites readers to submit questions about the quirks and the curiosities and the kind of buried backstories in the city, and reporters at the Star and our historians in the Missouri Valley Special Collections. They do the research and write articles, and they appear both in print in the Star and on the Star's and the library's websites. Next one, you can actually look for the next one tomorrow. That's on the Leeds neighborhood, just this side of the Truman Sports Complex. And we collaborate on a series, Java with a Journalist, that invites Kansas City residents to actually sit down on a Saturday morning over coffee and pastries with Star reporters at various library locations to talk about issues and concerns in that particular area. And the next one is October 5th. In the middle of one of our city's most diverse areas at the Northeast Branch, library's Northeast Branch. But tonight we're all about Patrick Mahomes and John Sherman and MUKU and 100 lost baseball teams. With us we have, without a doubt, the three people who are the most knowledgeable, the most insightful, who are the best equipped, I think, to enlighten us on what's what in sports here in Kansas City, and not just on the field, but off the field. I don't have to tell you the challenges that are going on in newspapers across the country today. The Star's facing those same challenges, but the sports section in particular has done a remarkable job of maintaining just a real quality, excellence, high standard in the product that they deliver. And that's not just me talking. The Star's a consistent winner in the Associated Press Sports Editors Annual Contest for Best Sports Section, for Best Sunday Section, for Best Special Section. And our three speakers tonight all show up regularly in APSE's individual award categories. We really should appreciate the newspaper, and particularly the sports section that we have here in this city. We really are blessed. Among them, Vahe, Gregorian, and Sam Mellinger, the two sports columnists, and Blair Kerkhoff, who is the paper's most experienced, most versatile, most plugged-in sports reporter, have a total of 96 years in the business, 56 of them at the Star. Now, I used to be in the business too, and I'm going to tell you that I look up to each one of them. They aren't just the three leading sports journalists in this city. I really believe that they are the city's preeminent journalists, period. Blair will guide the conversation tonight. He'll serve as a moderator of sorts with the two columnists. Know that Blair's reputation is not just local, nationally respected, coast to coast. This past January, the Football Writers Association presented him with the Burt McGrain Award, which is its equivalent of Hall of Fame induction. And 3 years ago, Blair was inducted into the U.S. Basketball Writers Association of America Hall of Fame. He's one of 8 people across the country to receive both of those honors. And Sam and Vahe are as perfectly complementary a pair of columnists as I think there are in the country. Something that the Star also had years back with Joe Poznansky and Jason Whitlock. Sam grew up in Lawrence, graduated from KU, and rose quickly from covering local high schools to covering the Royals and Major League Baseball, and then to writing columns. And both he and Vahe have been voted by the Associated Press sports editors as being among the nation's 10 best sports writers. That's, again, nationwide. Vahe, in 2017, was honored as the very best sports columnist in the country, in part for the work that he did at the funeral in the Dominican Republic for Royals pitcher Yordano Ventura. Vahe has also been named the top sports writer in Missouri 5 times by the National Sports Media Association. I'm fortunate and I'm proud to call all 3 of them friends. We're very fortunate to have them here tonight. Would you please welcome Blair Kerkhoff, Sam Mellinger, and Vahe Gregorian.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah. Middle. Wow, Steve, that was something.
That was something.
Most of it true, I believe. Hey, you guys are looking dapper tonight, by the way.
You're not used to seeing this?
No. In fact, this is very much the non-sports writer attire.
That's right. It's all a lie.
And does this mean I have to start growing some facial hair? Is this beard thing? Is that a sports
Not
writer
much.
trend?
You don't have to grow much.
Well, also, I have a picture on my phone with you and a mustache. We can show that later if you want.
From a while back. From a while back. Well, it really is it's an honor for me to sit here and talk sports with Sam and Vahe. Steve Weberg, our good friend, who we've known for decades, and was a fantastic journalist, award-winning journalist, and he got it right. These are the two of the best in the country, sports columnists, and guys, we're going to talk sports tonight. And one of the I think we can probably establish earlier, it'll be obvious soon after we begin chatting about this, is that sports, we have a lot of fun talking about sports. And I can't think of another way to cross barriers than sports, or a better way to cross barriers than sports. We talk about things that divide us, politics and religion, race, and if you're in this part of the country, State Line Road, things that divide us. But one thing that unites us is sports, and the fact that maybe we're not all Chiefs fans or Royals fans or Sporting KC fans here, but I imagine most people in here are, and that's what we have in common. It's just a common bond for us. And I would have included the colleges, but that's a big divisive force in this region, which gives, I think, Kansas City a lot of its sports flavor, the college cheering of KU, K-State, and Missouri especially. So Steve was right. It's, as you well know, we're just a few days away from the Chiefs kickoff. I thought we would start there. And we have spoken to this topic often in the last couple of weeks, how we think the Chiefs will fare this year. Vahe and I, this morning, were part of a Facebook Live conversation that's now a podcast on the Star's website, where we projected the Chiefs' final record, what we think the Chiefs' final record is going to be. Sam did that in print. It was in the paper a couple days ago and online on Monday. So we'll spend some time talking about the Chiefs, since they're right in front of us. And there's great anticipation for a successful season, as great as many I can remember. Sam, you grew up in the Kansas City area. I've been here for 30 years. I can't remember, fans looking more forward to a football season than they are right now.
I don't think it's ever happened. There was one year, and I literally just thought about this, most anticipated.
I know what you're going to say. The 90s.
There was one year in there, and I can't remember which season it was, but Chester McLaughlin had signed, and one of our predecessors said 16-0 when he went on this campaign. And I think that season there was some legitimate. And I wish it was that 90. It turned out to be like an 8-8 team.
I think they were coming off a 13-3 season and signed Chester. Maybe it was 97 going into 98. And
they lost more than 0. I do remember that. But no, I mean, I think this is there might be more anticipation this season than there was for the 2015 Royals. And it's easy to like kind of laugh this off, but the 2016 Royals, like the World Series encore. I'm trying to think of like just a local team where there's been this kind of excitement. Now the Chiefs have a grander scale, right, than any other team around here, so that's part of it too. But 20, soon to be 24, I guess, still 23-year-old reigning MVP quarterback, and just a shameless collection of skill position talent, and a defense that I think should be better. I mean, the bar's pretty low.
At some point,
the bar is low, but even if they rank in the low 20s,
right? And they were 31st last year.
Yeah, they dragged that defense kicking and screaming to 12-4, and within a coin flip of the Super Bowl, I don't know, they seem better.
Vahe, the quarterback would seem to have a lot to do with our feeling about the Chiefs.
Yes, he does, and I'm of the mind, I think Sam thinks this too, and I think you think it too, that he'll be a better quarterback now. Maybe the numbers won't look the same because it was pretty gaudy last year, and some other things will affect that. Maybe if the defense is better, maybe the pace of the game changes a little bit. But I will say that Sam and our former colleague, Therese Paylor, really were out front on seeing what Patrick Mahomes could be. I mean, from day one, you had a sense that this guy wasn't just going to be maybe good or maybe a little special, that he could be franchise-changing type of quarterback. And it really proved true. I was kind of like, well, let's see. He's going to throw a lot of interceptions and big arm, so what? And I feel the need to share this moment. It's not a moment that ever happens in press boxes. Sorry, Sam.
Oh, boy.
But we're in Denver for the Chiefs game at the end of the 2017 season, and it's the first time Patrick Mahomes not only starts but plays at all,
yeah.
I guess. And there's a moment, some of you might remember, where I guess he's rolling right, and he throws the ball, I think, in between 8 sets of arms and just whistles it in there on the sideline to Demarcus Robinson. And I bring this up to say how unusual the moment is. It doesn't happen. Sam literally fell out of his chair.
It's true.
And
it's true.
And we actually, believe it or not, we do have a certain decorum in the press box. And, but I say it really because it was that extraordinary. And look, I think that was part of the excitement you were feeling about the possibilities with him from the get-go.
Well, it wasn't just that, it may be a weird example right now because of what happened a couple weeks ago, but Andrew Luck was this wildly hyped, 1-1 quarterback, and kind of a classic quarterback. Drop back, big, strong, athletic, but gonna do it in more traditional, for lack of a better word, way. Part of my excitement with Patrick, and only part, was just that he, from day one, if you just watch that Texas Tech tape, he was gonna do stuff in these wildly entertaining ways. I mean, it wasn't just gonna be a good quarterback. Franchise quarterback is the kind of guy that you can win because of, not just with, right? Check. But also do it by throwing a left-handed pass in Denver and, the 4th and 9 play to Tyreek Hill against ball. That kind of stuff too just takes it to another level, especially in our business.
Yeah,
it's great to win, but give me some good content.
I'd add the no-look pass to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We do, this is a joke also, but we do sort of always say, how does it affect me when we have to write a story?
Right.
Is there something to write here?
Yeah.
And it's been kind of infinite with him. In fact, so much so that I think rare is the person of that much interest that taking slivers of his life has been something we've done, whether it's something about his voice or something about his demeanor or something about how he is in the locker room. There's always something to kind of peel off and write about Patrick. And I think it's worth noting that Sam and I each have been to Patrick's hometown in the last couple of years and came away with 2 sort of totally different stories. I went more recently and just tried to think about writing something beyond the arm about who Patrick really is and the traits of his that are both who he is as a person, but that also maybe speak a little to how he is as a quarterback, whether it's just a kind of constant sense of awareness and sort of being nimble about what's going on around him all the time. And I think, Sam, your story was, I'm sure, the most read story we've ever had about him because it really drilled deep into who he was and what his real roots are.
Maybe, but that's a timing thing, right? That was right. It ran 2 days before he threw 4 touchdowns and against the San Diego Chargers of Los Angeles, which I will call them forever.
It's our new name for the Chargers,
Yeah.
by the way. part of our, I don't want to, skepticism is probably too strong a word, but maybe a little bit of doubt that we had is he had a losing record as a starter at Texas Tech. It was, I think, 13-16, something like that, as a starting quarterback. And the other thing that strikes me about Patrick Mahomes, and I'm sure many people in here could speak to this, is that at least in the social media era, Kansas City hasn't had an athlete quite like this. It's just not as popular nationally, and we've had great athletes. The Royals had plenty of them on the 14 and 15 teams, but nobody has risen to the level of national notoriety as Patrick Mahomes. And every single day there seems to be a new Patrick Mahomes commercial. Right. The latest of which are State Farm with Aaron Rodgers and
Head and Shoulders.
Head and Shoulders, Madden. I mean, you name the product, or he's probably endorsing it. In fact, you can tell the Travis Kelce story. We were talking to Travis Kelce the other day about this.
Yeah,
it was your story.
We were asking Travis Kelce a few different things, but I asked him what I think the way I phrased it, Blair, was something about what's different about Patrick this year, if anything is different, or what's different because of him, something to that effect. And Travis started talking about all the Oakley sunglasses in the locker room, all the Head and Shoulders products, the Hunt's ketchup. I would think it's sort of his way of saying he's the same guy.
Yeah.
But all this stuff, and it is interesting. I mean, you've said this, Blair. I've come to wonder a little bit about if there's an oversaturation point on his exposure. And the point you've made, which I think is really true, is there's no such thing here. Maybe nationally. Maybe, I don't know if people in Green Bay will get tired of him.
Yeah, so our colleague Pete Gradhoff wrote today about the latest commercials that Patrick Mahomes is participating in, and I found it interesting, and I imagine, yes, there might be a saturation point for him nationally, but I don't think people here can get enough, and all of this is based on 16 regular season, 2 playoff, and then the game in 17, so 19 football games that Patrick Mahomes has played. That's how different he is, and different than anybody that I've experienced in my time here. Sam, you grew up. I mean, I know how much Bo Jackson means to you.
Yes.
I know how much.
Yes.
I know how important he is. But,
yes.
But the difference, I'll let you explain it. My idea of the difference is Bo didn't reach the level of success for his team that Patrick Mahomes did.
To me, I mean, Bo was like perfect timing for me. Like, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think it's going to sound like an exaggeration, but I think Bo turned me into a sports fan in a lot of ways, just because like it was just incredible. Like he just defied, imagination sometimes of, like running sideways on the wall and, the throw on Harold, like all this stuff is just like a human being can do these things. This is crazy. But like, if I was going to argue that he had a Hall of Fame career, which I might, I probably wouldn't convince a lot of you. But like this is the difference here. One is time, right? Joe Posnanski wrote a beautiful piece on Bo a few years ago it was the 25th anniversary of his rookie season, I think, and it was about how like that can never happen again because there wasn't as much coverage. There wasn't 24-hour, there wasn't Twitter, there was all that stuff, and so there was like a sort of a folk hero element to that. That can't exist now. And so that's one big difference. But the other thing is, like, Patrick Mahomes is like, Bo was never close to an MVP in either sport. I think he could have been in either sport if he just would have played that one sport. But he did it in his first year. And again, I mean, if you think about this, like his worst game last year was either, the time he threw for 300 and some yards against the Jaguars, who at the time were the best defense in the league, or the time that he won the game in overtime against Baltimore and had the 4th and 9, or another time that he threw for 300 and some yards and like only 3 touchdowns and he threw that interception or something. Like it's like the bad first half against New England, never mind the 35 points or whatever in the second half. They haven't lost a game, and this I assume would happen. I mean, history would say would happen. But like I've said this a million times, like the Patrick Mahomes, like watching him is like this constant battle between what you think is possible and then what he's actually doing in reality, which is better than what you think is possible. So, but at some point you would think that they'll lose a game that he doesn't play well in. The Rams game was the closest thing, but he threw for 480 yards and what was
I
it,
think
five
six-
touchdowns?
I think six that
Five,
night.
six touchdowns in
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Just had like a bad interception. But, they haven't lost a game that he's played poorly in, I guess. And maybe that'll change if he has a bad playoff game or whatever. But he just, especially with the fastest guy in the NFL, the best tight end, a pretty good offensive line. Not a great offensive line, but a pretty good one. Sammy Watkins is a above average 2, I would think. Now 3 running backs that can, beat you on any given play. It's just, he'd be good even with, a bunch of guys named Fred. If Garrett Dieter had to play like all the, he's the tide that lifts all boats, right? But he's got these other guys that lift all boats. It's a crazy combination.
One other thing, just to chime in, it's a little bit back to an earlier point Blair made. With this just amazing number of endorsements he's doing, and part of what that is not just the performer, right? It's a guy who's, for lack of a better term, a pretty wholesome guy. Easy to really root for him as a person. And we see it all the time we have limited exchanges with him in the media. Typically it's 8 or 10 minutes once a week, and after games.
And that's in a group setting.
And that's always a group setting. We had one sit down in the preseason where it was the 3 of us and Brooke Pryor had a total of 20 minutes. It started as 30 minutes. So we were
Right.
we were like, okay, you got your 2 minutes. I'm up. Get out of the way.
Yeah.
But he's unfailingly that way, unfailingly polite. Some of that, no doubt, is how he was raised, who he is. But I think we all had a special place in our hearts for Alex Smith a little bit, and certainly Alex was very much that way in how he treated everybody. And one of the things about this that stands out to me, because it always contrasts a lot with Ned Yost, the Royals manager, Patrick has a basic agreeability anytime you ask him a question. And invariably, not every single time, so I shouldn't say invariably, but almost always, this first word when you ask him a question is, yeah. And then he kind of takes you there, and even if he doesn't agree with you in the whole premise of the question, he sort of ushers you in and says, yeah, you're fine asking me that question. Ned Yost, almost unfailingly, goes, no. And there have been times, I think this is true, where we've heard him say, no, yeah, and then he just kind of starts working with you. And actually, Ned almost always gives you a good answer, but first he's kind of got to box you out and just say, I'll do what I want to do here. Patrick's a little different than that. It is his move.
I mean, it's
his
like
go-to.
comical to the extent that he does it. One thing I think that Patrick, and there's a Ned Yost story in my head that we'll probably get to at some point, but about that superstition, just remind me, is that one thing that they have in common, and they are very different people. They're obviously different quarterbacks, but they were raised really well. They both were raised in really strong support systems. I think Alex's dad is a high school principal, or was at one point.
Right.
And Alex, forget about football for a second, is like one of just literally a model philanthropist, like a model, his center, the Alex Smith Foundation, I forgot the exact name, but the work he does to help foster kids, kind of when they leave the system, is the work of a saint. And Patrick was raised in a very strong support system as well. His parents, got divorced, but both very much in his life, love him. His godfather, LaTroy Hawkins, is an amazing man. And that has a lot, that has to have a lot to do with it too. Because it's one thing to be a good athlete, but to have the rest of it too is what, sort of takes you to the next level, I think.
Well, and it's, this is an idea that we've known about, discussed. I'm not sure how much we've written about, though. The basic red shirt year for Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs, think about who he was surrounded by.
Yeah.
He's this wonderful talent with a rocket arm and, this grand sense of daring, but he didn't play as a rookie, which is a little unusual now for first-round draft pick quarterbacks not to play immediately. He didn't play until week 17 against the Broncos. Who all did he have around him to become the NFL quarterback that he is? Alex Smith, in the quarterback room every day, not every day during the season, but through training camp, and Matt Nagy, the head coach of the Chicago Bears, who's playing tonight, opening the NFL season, was the offensive coordinator. Of course, Andy Reid, who is this offensive mastermind, and I can't help. And Mike Kafka, the kind of a coach recruited specifically to work with Patrick Mahomes. I just can't think of a better learning environment that created for a player than what the Chiefs created for Patrick Mahomes.
That stuff's real too. I mean, there's a story that we've talked about and written a few times already, but I think it was after. It was either in Denver. It was that weekend that Patrick was making his first start, and I can't remember if it was the night before at the hotel or after the game at the stadium. But either way, Pat Senior, Patrick's dad, made a point to corner Alex Smith. And Pat, for anybody that doesn't know, played, was it 11 years, I think, in the big league. So he has been in clubhouses, and he has seen how veterans act when there's a young guy that's there to specifically take his job. And he knows how that usually works. And he made a point to say, Alex, I appreciate everything you've done for my son. You've helped him immensely. I can never repay you. And Alex says, of course, the kid's going to be special. And that kind of relationship, the Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers thing is kind of famous, and I think, I think a lot of us would like to, tell ourselves that we'd be Alex Smith, but I think some of us would be Brett Favre.
Okay, so we're journalists, we're cynical, we're skeptical. You really kind of have to prove it to us. So all three of us at some point this week projected a final record for the Chiefs, and we were pretty hard on them. I noticed this week. Sam, what'd you project?
13-3.
13-3. That's a good one. I went 12-4, and Vahe, yours was really interesting.
Yeah, I went 12-3-1. I didn't want to be like these guys. About time they had a tie.
Oh. Well, I mentioned this morning, and I'll repeat it, that I think it's 11 times in Chiefs history they've won at least 11 games. So 60 years, the first 59 years of the franchise, they've won at least 11 games. And only once, after an 11 victory season, did they match or exceed that number of victories the next year. So, and it's happened in the Andy Reid era. He won 11, I think, in 16, and then 12 and 17. So that's how difficult it is to repeat a year that the Chiefs just had, a 12-4 season. To think that they're going 12-4 or 13-3 the next year, a lot of people do, including us. It's really, really difficult to do. I can only think of one franchise that does that consistently,
yeah, right.
And that's the one that the Chiefs are trying to chase, the one that chased them out of the playoffs last year, the one that's just kind of inhuman, the Belichick Patriots. So, okay, before we move on from the Chiefs, let's talk about Tyreek Hill. It made the offseason pretty interesting for Kansas City and for the media, the Tyreek Hill drama. And I guess I don't know how to get into it, except maybe we can kind of review what we reported and why the Chiefs kind of did what they did, which was to suspend Tyreek Hill when the news initially was reported of possible abuse of the child, and this was I want to say it was in March. I'm getting my
early March.
Was it early March?
Well, it was draft night, right?
Like
wasn't the
that was the
No.
tape. That was the KCC draft.
The police reports were there were two police reports
Right.
from his no arrest, but two police
were March,
reports
yeah.
for incidents that occurred at his house out in Johnson County in March. And so that was reported. So the next thing that happens that moves the story along is the tape, right? 6 minutes worth of a tape recording between Tyreek Hill and his girlfriend, and a lot of the coverage that followed was based on that 6 minute tape. And when that tape was released on Channel 5, we knew that night, because of the reporting, that wasn't the entire tape. It was just 6 minutes of an 11-minute tape, and a lot of the reporting, and I think a lot of the narrative in the next few weeks was based on the information that was on that tape. So let's get to in April. And maybe, I don't know if it was draft. I can't remember
draft night. I believe this is right.
Draft night, the tape hit.
It was the first part of the tape was released.
Okay.
If you remember, it was probably only 3 minutes or so that day. There was another set of about 3 minutes
Right.
released the next day. But the reason that night stands out is that's the night that the Chiefs announced they were essentially suspending Tyreek Hill.
Right, not allowing him in the facility.
Yeah,
Part
and
of the facility.
was one thing. We can circle back to this point, but there's never been clear to me in a conversation with the Chiefs if it was a little bit of the sort of 1-2 dynamic of, if you recall, the day before that was when the Johnson County DA announced that they weren't going to bring charges, but
That's right.
rather unusually made it a point to say we believe a crime has been committed, and suggested in multiple ways, not maybe even just in as many words, maybe almost directly saying that they weren't cooperating. He wasn't getting the cooperation they needed to determine how the crime had been committed of abuse of the 3-year-old boy.
Right. So now we forward to the day that Frank Clark was introduced, the free agent signing from the Seahawks. Had a press conference after the draft, and Andy Reid there says, well, the case has been reopened, and well, that's interesting. Why would he knows something we don't know? But it's Andy Reid, and he's speaking at a press conference, and we called district attorney in Johnson County, couldn't get that confirmed, but Andy Reid must know something, so that was reported as well, and it turns out it was never reopened. And Andy Reid misspoke and later apologized for misspeaking. I guess where I want to take this is, I believe, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I believe, except for that moment where Andy Reid had misspoke at the Frank Clark press conference, that the Chiefs handled this situation about as well as the team could have been expected to handle it. Suspended Tyreek Hill, essentially, in essence, suspending Tyreek Hill, while the team and the NFL tried to gain facts on what happened. And when the investigation, or at least they were, the Chiefs and the NFL were satisfied that there was not an offense here that warranted a suspension, made the announcement that he would receive no game suspension. And I was surprised by that. And I was surprised because Tyreek Hill did apologize for that snippet on the tape where he was threatening to his girlfriend, and I thought that alone would have bought him at least a 2-game suspension for violating the NFL's conduct policy. The NFL didn't see it that way, and we should make clear that it's not the team that suspends the player; it's the NFL that does that. He would have been violating the NFL's conduct policy. So, do you guys agree with that the Chiefs handled it about as well as they could have?
I do feel like that, but I think you wrote pretty extensively about that in the day or so after.
I think that with all my heart. And it's also, you said it's the league, not the team that suspends them. It's also the league, not the team that investigates, that does that part of it. So that is separate. Now look, like the Chiefs had, it's probably a wrong word here, but I can't think of another one right now, but fortunate timing in this. If it's going to happen, they had, I think it was March 5th. That date stands out to me. But I think it was earlier, mid-March. So we're talking about, 6 months before the first game. And so they could slow play it a little bit. It wasn't like Kareem Hunt that happened at 3 o'clock or whatever on a Friday, which I also thought they handled really well. Now, look, they kicked him off the team. They hate when I say this, but it's true. They kicked him off the team not because of the video, but because he lied to them. If he told the truth initially, that wouldn't have been, maybe he gets suspended or something, but I think he's still on the team. But with Tyreek, they did have some time, and they acted when, I don't know what other choice they had when that tape hit, and because the Chiefs hadn't heard that before. And at some point between that and that 8-hour meeting with Tyreek and the league, and I can't remember the exact date of that, but somebody between those two dates, the Chiefs got the full tape, and so they had, some more information. They had that full tape before it was aired on 610, right? 610 Sports. So, there's an old adage in baseball a lot where you never make a decision until you have to make a decision, until there's a deadline. The Chiefs didn't have to make a decision at any point. They took some arrows. in the meantime, but it proved to be the right decision. I was also surprised that he didn't get at least a game or two. I just thought the language, the threats to a woman who he had, pleaded guilty, to abusing in the past when she was pregnant. I just thought that would be worth a game or two. But maybe, the tape was made without his knowledge. Maybe they felt he was backed into it a little bit. I'm not going to speak for them, but I was surprised at that. But the Chiefs, I don't know what. You're right. Andy Reid misspoke. I think that was the way I've understood that story. Is it was a very quick sort of game of telephone as he was walking into that press conference. Is a story I've heard, and it just sort of he heard. Somebody said one thing and he heard a slightly different. Which I've done that. I think everybody in this room has probably done that, and he said the wrong thing, which is really out of character because Andy Reid does not say much, So for him to say one thing and it wasn't true, it's like, oh.
In fact, was it yesterday when he was? We were talking about. I can't remember what the topic was exactly, but he suggested he'll let us know later. Then he goes, or I might not.
Yeah,
right.
And that was pretty candid of him.
Yeah, this is year 7. We know what's going on now.
One thing I will say, I do think that the actions they took were pretty right. But I do think there's been room for them to say more condemning, even if it's in generalities, condemning the sorts of behavior that might be indicated by the things that we've been told and heard.
Yeah.
Also, I do want to say that Johnson County DA was free to correct that record,
Yes,
despite
he was.
Andy misspeaking. And
Absolutely.
again, we called him multiple times, no comments or whatever it was our news reporters were doing, and for whatever reason, it was almost 6 weeks. And again, why not clear the record?
So much of that story was driven by the tape, and I've maintained, and it's in the past now, but I've always maintained that if the entire tape had been leaked to us, the whole thing would have played out differently. If it would have been leaked to the Star and not a television station that decided to play just 2 snippets that totaled about half of the tape, then I don't think that's the way that we would have gone about it.
Well, and also while declaring that everything else that wasn't played
Right.
was irrelevant.
Right.
And saying it was either salacious or irrelevant. And I won't speak for Sam, but I know we had to do some thinking afterwards about accepting that at face value. At least I had to review that with myself and didn't like that. And even 32 years into this, you feel like you still learn lessons about
Absolutely.
having the whole pie in front of you.
Yeah, I screwed up. I just the fact of just believing that wholeheartedly that okay, there's some personal information that they thought was inappropriate, but when that full tape came out, I was like, this.
Right.
The only thing in there that was kind of anything was that they had sex, but they got a kid. I assume that they've had sex, but.
All right, so they brought the microphones down, so we better quickly transition and cover some Royals here,
okay.
and maybe touch on the colleges. We're at the doorstep of the Chiefs season, but we're toward the end of the Royals. Lost today, ended their 4-game winning streak, the glorious 4-game winning streak that they were on. Look, it's a disaster of a season, and I think we talked about this the other day that. I could find nothing more interesting about the Royals than Alex Gordon taking the mound in a recent game.
Twice.
Right. And Arteaga pitching as well. But then all of a sudden, John Sherman showed up and bought him some Royals. So that's new. That's a story. Let's talk about that and who knows what it means. We don't. It's just so early to make this judgment, but every indication is this is a terrific thing for the Royals. And I'm not saying the Glass family hasn't been terrific for the Royals. They won a championship. They won 2. There's two or three more flags hanging out, flying out at Kauffman Stadium under the Glass regime. But now there's going to be a new owner starting, the end of this year and into next year, and a new era of Royals baseball. Only the 3rd owner of this organization. So, again, Sam, you wrote about it extensively a couple times, wonderfully, I might add. So, give us your John Sherman.
I mean, it's pretty wild. Could we just do Glass really quick, too? It's two very different David Glasses, right? Like pre-2006 and after.
Yeah.
And from 2006 on, I think maybe he had to hit like rock bottom, so to speak, but he did everything that a small money owner should be doing. And they built the infrastructure, and it turned out in 2015, the Yankees and the Red Sox are the only teams in the American League to win more World Series or more pennants than the Royals since David Glass took over. There's something to be said for that. John Sherman seems like, are people, you remember Weird Science? Remember that movie? Like, he seems like a creation, like a scientist. Like, if you're going to build a Royals owner in a lab, you'd want him to be from here. You'd want him to have a lot of money. If possible, you'd love for him to have experience in ownership. You'd want him to love the game, baseball, and you'd want him to view the Royals as something more than a business. You'd want him to view it as a community asset, and I choose those words specifically because that's exactly the term he used when he bought a minority share of the Indians. He seems absolutely perfect. Like, he keeps a really low profile in Kansas City. As Steve Baccarat, the terrifically talented and wonderful reporter, knows John a little bit from, he's written stories, and he's like, he runs kind of a boring business. It's like propane. Like, that's not like an exciting, thing that people are going to write a lot of stories about. But he was perfectly, always fine doing that. Talk about propane, but, there's not much there about his personality. So we don't know a lot about him other than that. But, we have talked to a lot of people who know him, a lot of people that have worked with him both in business and in a lot of charities around town, including the Kauffman Foundation. And the things they say, it's, Cliff Illig, who knows him, said he's close to perfect. If you're going to write up the specs, this is the guy that would come out.
Well, in a otherwise terrible season for the Royals. This was terrific. I see it as terrific news for the Royals. Prospects for improvement? Any way to fast track this thing? Soler hit his 40th home run last night, the hardest hit baseball in the history of this StatCast thing, which I find interesting and really don't understand what it all means. But I'll take their word for it. Is this what are we looking at here? 2022 for competitiveness? What do you think?
Well, I hate to keep giving him so much credit, but Sam...
I do too. Nothing I hate more than giving Sam credit.
Sam in 2016 understood that you couldn't have it both ways, and that is what the Royals were trying to do, right? They were trying to, and you can understand why, right? They thought they still had enough of the competitive pieces to keep going, but that was the time to reinvest, dish off, and get the highest value for the pieces, knowing the debt was going to come due on the free agency for so many guys. I thought it was the noble right idea, but you were very practical about it, and I think we're seeing the downside of what happened.
Yeah, I think like the mistake wasn't not blowing it up. The mistake was not blowing it up and then trying to win. You can't trade Wade Davis for Jorge Soler and say that you're trying to win now. Like, that just doesn't work. Like, and I thought that trade was good when they made it. I was like, most people hated that trade, but 4 years, I think, of control over Soler is better than 1 year of Davis. But then if you do that, you got to trade everybody. There's no point in going 81 and 81, which I think is exactly what they ended up, right? Maybe I got my years mixed up.
In 16, I think in 17 they were 1 game or 2 games, 80 and 82 or something.
Yeah, there's no value in 500. You're either winning or you're being so bad that you can draft Bobby Witt Jr. That's where you want to be. They're really bad right now, and it's worse now than it was in April and May, because what looked like a really good season from Mondesi, finally the breakout, like this is sort of, Francisco Lindor-ish. And you look at his numbers now, and plus he's been hurt, and that was the biggest question coming in. He missed, I think, 15 games at one point, and then 40, I forget the exact number, but 40-some at another point. So the same questions are going to exist in his age 26 season that existed his age 25 season. You just want a little bit more progress. I think they're going to lose a lot of games next year too. I think that next year, though, Brady Singer and Jackson Kowar and like some Daniel Lynch, like some of those, that all college pitcher class from, it was last year, right? Last year's draft will start to transition next year. And, that's sort of the, was it 2011? When Sal came
Calvi,
up and
Hosmer,
and
Moustakas.
Moustakas, like it was around that time. So that's sort of the, I know it seems like it is a long time, 10 years later, but you go up and you go down, and now they're trying to go up again. So I wouldn't expect them to contend next year, but I think that's when the thing we'll start to get some clues. After that, maybe Khalil Lee and some of these other guys. But.
Well, in 11, it took them 2 years to get to a winning season.
Yep.
13, they were
Yep.
10 games over 500. So, all right, trade or keep Soler.
I'm of the mind that you should trade him. I've come to think that high value and not exactly a prototype of what the Royals have. Now, if you just decide you're going to go all in on he's your DH and he's not going to be anything else, maybe that's a different conversation. But I just don't know if they understand what they want with him, and I think he has value for the things that they'd like to get.
What do you think, Sam?
Trade, yeah. I mean, like the answer is like, it depends on what they could get, right?
Yeah.
And that's true. But in general, I think he's more valuable for somebody else than he is for the Royals, because the stadium that the Royals play in diminishes his greatest strength, which is power hitting, and it amplifies his greatest weakness, which is range in the outfield. So it makes sense to me. That guy would be a monster in Baltimore or Toronto, or like just a smaller park where they can hit more home runs. So it seems like there's some value there. Now, I think home runs have been diminished. There's a whole nother, sort of depending on where you want to look at
Right.
it.
But he is fifth. I mean, his 40 makes him fifth. Even though
Yes.
there's a lot of home runs being hit this year, he's hit more than most.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's a real thing. His power is a real thing.
It's absolutely real. It's absolutely real. And he's hit more than most in a bigger ballpark than
Yep.
pretty much anybody.
Right.
I don't know, like, how many trades have there been where somebody's given up, an A prospect for a power hitter?
Well,
But if you can get some good talent, like, I would absolutely make that deal.
Just to tweak the question a little too, I mean, how many people are on this team right now that you think are going to be part of the turn, whenever it is that they're competitive again? How many people are on this team right now that are going to be part of that?
Yeah.
Just go through their lineup first before you talk about pitching. Go through their lineup.
Mondesi, we think.
Mondesi, we think. Hunter Dozier.
I think maybe. I mean, they need to see if this year's real.
Mm-hmm. Needs another year to see if this year is
Yep.
real.
And he's also 27, I think.
Yeah,
Maybe
27.
28 now, but you never know. You never know about that.
Whit, Merrifield.
I feel good about Whit.
I do too. I want it to be that. I want him to
Yeah,
be part of it.
yeah.
He should age well. Like, I mean, he profiles as the kind of guy that, like, he's got diverse skills, and, he's athletic. He's got a swing that should, that has avoided slumps. I think he'll be better at a later age than most guys.
Okay. So I agree with you guys. I think we're looking at 21, 22 for the next, meaningful September baseball in Kansas City. How much fun was that?
was great.
Meaningful September baseball. I miss that. I do. I really miss that. Was so much fun, and they took it away so quickly. Everybody else gets meaningful baseball. St. Louis gets it, and Minnesota and Cleveland, they all get it. Why can't we have it every year? Okay, let's switch it to the colleges real quick. So I was talking to Seren Petra today on the radio, and so we talk about KU, K-State, and Missouri, and they all had their college football openers this weekend, and the least interesting was the most impressive, right? Kansas State. They just went out and overwhelmed an opponent, did exactly what they were supposed to do. Kansas played the same type of opponent, won by the skin of their teeth, and everybody celebrated and waved the wheat, and it was just happy, happy, happy over in Lawrence. But at least they got the win. And if you're a Missouri fan these days, those who I know who are Missouri fans this week, I just kind of shake my head and tisk, and oh my gosh.
I bumped, Carrington Harrison was out at the Chiefs today, and he said, how come every time I bump into you, something bad has happened with Missouri? And I said, well, it's perhaps because things like this seem to happen more often than you'd like.
That's right.
I mean,
it's because you see each other once a month or so.
But it is a shame, and one of the things that it's possibly just a one-game thing, and it seemed like some fixable things there, right? I mean, you'd like to see more out of Kelly Bryant, but they can't get off to another dreadful start, and this is a bad first game. Now they got 5 in a row at home. I think they really need to have a homestand here that has some clout.
As somebody who covered Missouri you covered Missouri for a long time. Is it fair to say that maybe no major college program, athletic program in the country needs a Final Four or a spot in the college football playoff more than Missouri?
I think that's quite reasonable to say, and I do. The Missouri fan. There's some in here. There's probably some Kansas fans in here, but I mean, the Missouri fan. A lot of fan bases will feel like they've suffered, but they've had national championships. So right. I'm sure KU basketball fans feel like I can't believe we only got the Elite Eight. I mean, so it's very relative, right? But Missouri's had, I think this is right, 2 national championships in all its sports. 1954 baseball team, on which Norm Stewart twirled a 13-hitter for the game-winning, the series-winning.
Tight little 13-hitter.
Yes. And then I think a mid-'60s indoor track.
I think it was the very first
Maybe it was
NCAA
64,
indoor track.
65, somewhere in there. And that's it. And then it's very easy to think of sort of the calamitous, crazy types of losses they've had because they stand out because it's sort of in a vacuum. There hasn't been...
There's nothing to balance it. There's no championship to balance the craziness with.
I mean, I visited with Gary Pinkel recently, and I would say that Kansas game in 2007 is certainly the high point of the program in the last 60 years. And then they lost.
Here's some chuckles out there.
I mean, they were number 1 in the nation for a week.
Yeah. I maintain that game in 2007 was the until the Royals had their run in 14 and 15. I don't know how to describe it, but the greatest sporting event. To have 80,000 people at Arrowhead to cheer a KU-MU football game that the winner was going to be number 1. What? What alternate universe is this? And to have it at the end of the season, it was the first game at Arrowhead, the first of a 6-year deal that got, that they didn't get to finish it out because of the SEC. And speaking of the SEC, Vahe, let's kind of evaluate it. Is this the 6th year out or 7th year? The 11-12 school year was the final one,
correct.
Right? Because
it was the Big 12 tournament.
Big 12 tournament. They won at Sprint Center and chanted SEC.
I didn't like that.
As they were accepting the Big 12 tournament trophy. Good thing. Bottom line, they make the right move.
I feel like something's lost, and I feel like something's lost here more than anything else.
Specifically in this town in which we sit.
Really in this room right now.
Right.
But I do. I feel like that, and as far as the question of the greater good, does it matter that now they're able to build a $98 million south end zone facility, and that I think it does matter. I think there's a prestige that comes with it. It's also a funny sort of question now, though. After they surprisingly won those 2 division titles in the 2nd and 3rd year in there.
Right.
But at that point, you're thinking, of course this is good. But football's going to be the telltale thing here on how we feel about this. It's an interesting question, though, to ask how they would have done in the Big 12 the last few years, too. I'm not sure we could make that translation.
I don't know if the success would have changed, but I think it has diminished their basketball, men's basketball. SEC doesn't care about it as much as the northern schools of the Big 12, which they would have played twice. So I was, Missouri did what it felt like it had to do to survive financially at a time that was just so uncertain in the college sports landscape. We just didn't know where these schools were going to end up, as the Big 12 was was on the brink of just losing, of disappearing, and Missouri took the road that they thought was the safest and most financially secure path, and Kansas and Kansas State were. There were some weeks there was so much uncertainty that they were looking at alternatives like the Mountain West Conference, which would have been a disaster for those schools. So here's where we are, and here's what the way I feel about it is it's turned Kansas City as a college sports headquarters town into more of a branch town. You know, we're not the headquarters anymore. We love the Big 12 tournament that's here every March, but we're not the center of gravity when it comes to college sports. We're the westernmost city in the SEC, and we're sort of the northeast corner of the Big 12, and not in the middle of anything anymore.
Do you, and one or both of you might have a feeling about this, and it's an imperfect question in a way, but had Kansas been offered a place in the SEC at that point, and Missouri not, would Kansas have taken it?
That's a good question. There was a rumor that Texas and Kansas were there were some talks with I remember Tony Barnhart, who covers the SEC for the Atlanta paper, was calling me. I remember on a Saturday morning, have you been hearing Texas and Kansas? SEC interested in getting into the Kansas City and of course the state of Texas. And I said I hadn't heard that, but I'll check. And it may have been a conversation, but nothing too serious. More likely was Kansas to the Big Ten, and those. Kansas and Oklahoma, perhaps to the Big Ten, we were hearing some of that too. I imagine there were some feelers, no formal conversations, but some feelers about that. So the question becomes, would Kansas have been better off in the Big Ten? Could they have separated from Kansas State? And what would have happened to the rest of the schools in the conference? But we say that's yesterday's news, but the Big 12's TV deal is due to be expires in the 24-25 season. We're approaching the point where it's these television contracts that hold conferences together. That's the glue that keeps these. It's the reason conferences exist. Is for television contracts for college football mostly. So this is a discussion that will continue here soon. The future of the college sports landscape. Having said that, I think the Big 12 is as on firmer ground as it's ever been. And as long as Texas and Oklahoma are happy where they are, and they are happy because they can win the Big 12 a lot easier than they can win the SEC, then I think the Big 12 will continue to exist. So,
two quick thoughts if I can. Like the one, Bill Hancock, our friend, told this to me at a lunch, and he said, feel free to write it and like rip it off as your own idea. And I wasn't even
which happens a lot, and we actually encourage that.
Yeah. I wasn't smart enough to take the offer, but because he said the Big 12 will stay together. The Big 12 has been pushed to extinction because of Texas's selfishness. The Big 12 will stay together because of Texas's selfishness. And I think that's exactly what happened. And the other quick thought is, I just had this nightmare, like just this violent thought in my head when you said like Kansas to the SEC and those poor football players. What?
That was only a couple years removed from their
poor guys. Yeah, man, they don't deserve that.
Where are we left with the Kansas-Missouri question?
Well, there's a force in Lawrence that creates the force field, and he coaches basketball. We thought it was in tandem with the athletic director, but they've since changed athletic directors, and it just so happens that the new AD is on board with the basketball coach when it comes to the Cold War.
Despite the fact that the new athletic director has allowed his daughter to go to Missouri.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So the border Cold War. So that's where we are. I don't see it happening anytime soon, which I know you feel this way, Vahe. I've always felt this way. It's a shame. I really do. Kansas fans will disagree. I think it's a shame that Kansas and Missouri don't play. You've seen
100%.
them.
Yep. 100%.
I don't think they would fill Arrowhead Stadium for football the way they used to, but couple years ago, we were at a charity basketball game at Sprint Center, and Kansas and Missouri played, and only 19,000 people showed up for an exhibition basketball game. So there might be some interest in a basketball series with that. So, all right. So with that, that's enough of us talking among ourselves. We've got a couple of microphones set up here. Please come to the microphone and ask questions, and these two brilliant columnists will help.
Yeah, my question is about, I'll make a statement, football and croquet will never be confused. And that brings me to my question. Do you think the misconduct of football players, and we have to, I know there's misconduct from basketball and baseball players as well, but football's a very aggressive sport, and you're trained to be aggressive, extremely aggressive. You got to knock people down, and that's football. Do you think there's a correlation between maybe somebody not being able to turn that off when they get off the field and their bad conduct, like Mr. Hill is one example, but certainly not the only one? Do you think there's a correlation between the fact that you're trained to be pretty aggressive, and don't get me wrong, I love football, love watching football, but it is a rough sport. And do you think there's a correlation between the fact that you're trained to be aggressive and some people are better at turning it off when they get off the field than others are? How do you feel about that?
I think there can be a correlation. I mean, but I think one of the things you said that really speaks to the point is that I think it's an individual thing too. I think for a lot of people it's an outlet, and I think it's separate and distinct. But I do think if you're constantly preaching aggressiveness, that there's certainly a chance that trickles into your daily life. I think it can if you're not a strong person with the right mindset. That's my thought. I don't know.
Yeah, I think similar, part of it, and I think this is what you're alluding to, but you self-select in some ways for a comfort with violence, right? And then depending on how ambitious you are about your career, your coaches are encouraging that out of you further. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's something to that. It's different than golf, right? But I also think that personal responsibility is an important thing. And to just blame, and I know this isn't what you're asking about, but we've gotten into this some with CTE, right? To just blame something else for one's actions, I think misses the point sometimes. But I think you're onto something. I think that you're self-selected, and then it's further even pulled out of you. I think there's something to that, but to me, personal responsibility is still king. Yeah, but thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is about your work as journalists. It seems to me as a fan, viewer, reader, that the Royals are much more forthcoming in terms of accessibility, information than the Chiefs. And I wondered if you think that's true, and if it is true, why?
You're very observant.
Yeah.
I'll say that I don't just believe it's true, it is true. Why I think is a little more complicated. Part of it, I think, is just the Chiefs are in the NFL. And the NFL sees everything as a state secret. I'm not really sure why it's gotten to be that, but it's certainly perpetuated, and I think the Chiefs take it to the extreme. I will say this just as an observation about the Royals. When I moved here in 2013, one of my greatest concerns actually was covering baseball again. I hadn't done too much baseball in recent years in St. Louis, and I always found the Cardinals actually difficult to deal with. It just sort of a snooty entitlement feeling, and the minute I walked into the Royals clubhouse, it just felt like they want you here. And I think I've stayed with that feeling. I think it trickles down from Dayton. I think it's also in their media relations people. Like Mike Swanson is really one of the best in the business. He's their vice president for media relations. So I see it as exactly what you're describing. I mean, just completely different environments. I'm not sure I'm able to really explain the why, other than the Chiefs take it to the extreme of what the NFL seems to preach.
I wonder if that's reflected in the way, in what we write and what's presented to an audience. Can you tell? Can you tell that there's a difference in what you read and what you hear? So how about this I found this interesting. We mentioned Ned Yost and kind of how he can be sometimes cantankerous. And Ned Yost has to talk to the media 4 times a day for 162 days a year. He does. He has 4 different interview opportunities a day. And he reminds us constantly how much he doesn't like doing interviews. I mean, for a man who does nearly 1,000 of the, it's just 800 of these a year, it's amazing that he's actually as good about it as he is. So, but he does. He sits down with the traveling beat reporters early. He sits in the dugout and talks to a group. Then he talks to Ryan Lefevre, whoever on the radio in the dugout after he's finished, and then he does a post game. So every time the Royals play, he's up talking to the media, and I'm going to miss him when he goes. I am.
Too.
So, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, could you address the push for a downtown baseball stadium? Because I was lucky enough to go to all the postseason games, 14, 15, and most of the home games. But you fill the stands when you have a good team. So why the push for a downtown? And also just a comment. I watched my first pro football games last year because I found out what neat players we have. So I like the stories about them off the field.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we didn't cover that when we talked about John Sherman and the prospect of a downtown baseball stadium. It's really interesting. There's a lot of dynamics at work here. I'll start by saying, and then Sam, you pick it up, that one of the reasons that the Truman Sports Complex exists where it does is because both organizations thought regionally and not in the metro. They wanted to attract fans from Nebraska, Iowa, western Kansas, eastern Missouri, eastern Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Vahe and I joke about this all the time. The original Chiefs logo is the caricature Indian with the tomahawk running through an outline of the 6 states. That's how that's how Kansas City kind of sold itself as the sports as a regional, and the intersection of I-70 and I-435 provided room, and it was easy in and out, easy access for fans, and there's 18,000 parking spaces at the Truman Sports Complex, and you can always find a place to park there, even when the Royals or the Chiefs fill it up. There's you're not parking on side streets or whatever. That changes with a downtown ballpark. Is Kansas City ready for a downtown baseball stadium?
I think, well, this is a weird thing because I'm probably projecting a little bit. I really want a downtown ballpark. I think it would be awesome. I just think it would be a lot of fun. I think it would help downtown. I think it would help the Royals too. I think that
Revenue-wise.
There's a bigger revenue potential. And part of the conversation will end up being how much of the parking money the Royals can take, because there's actually, believe it or not, there's a similar amount of parking within, however you want to draw the radius of the Sprint Center, as there is of Royal Stadium or Kauffman Stadium. But you don't think about it that way because you got to wait for a crosswalk, you got to cross the street, it's a parking garage, garages take longer to get out of, all those things. But I think that anybody who tells you 100% or 0%, they will move downtown or they won't, is lying. Nobody knows. There's way too many factors. But I do think that they'll explore it fully. That there is more of an appetite, and this existed before John Sherman. There was more of an appetite internally in the Royals' power structure from David Glass on down for an exploration of downtown than there was the last time. The last time it was Glass didn't want it, so it wasn't going to happen, And this time, some people, and now it doesn't matter, it'll be John Sherman, but this time people would, hey, that's where more people live, more of our fans. This could be, after work, people go to a game that maybe they don't want to drive out to, kind of the suburbs. Downtown is a lot different now than it was was that vote in 06? Something like that.
Right, 5 or 6.
Downtown's a lot different, so I think that conversation's going to be different, but I don't know enough to say because nobody knows how much tax money is going to, all that stuff, but I think they are going to explore it as fully as possible.
I'm forever fascinated by the idea that at 435 and I-70 in Missouri is the Truman Sports Complex with no development around it. Yeah. And on the intersection of 435 and 70 in Kansas, there's the Legends and where Speedway, T-Bones, soccer stadium exists. They were smarter about the development there than what happened on the Missouri side.
Where there's 3 races and 18 soccer games versus 81 Royals games. It makes no sense.
Nope,
no offense to Taco Bell.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Great job, guys. On David Glass, I don't remember other buyers in stepping up when he bought the team. So my question is, to what extent does Glass deserve credit for either saving baseball for Kansas City or at least eliminating the risk of Kansas City losing baseball?
I think a lot. I'm going to just jump in. there was, the way that it worked, he was I forgot the exact title, but basically chairman of the chairman of the board or head of the trust that operated the Royals for about 5 years, 6 years after Ewing Kauffman died. And their mission was kind of to strip down to make it more attractive for a buyer. And there was a group, Miles Prentice, and I forgot how he made his money, but he had a group, and then it turned out that the money wasn't real. And they kind of sent it back. And then David Glass got the team with a lower bid, if I remember right. And it was because he was more solid. And but anyway, I'm rambling a little bit. To answer your question, I think a lot. And him and Ewing Kauffman are friends. And Ewing Kauffman wanted David Glass to get the team, to own the team, because he thought that was the best for the future of the franchise. They would stay, first of all, is the most important talk. Because I don't think the Royals were ever close to moving, but they were in some contraction talks. You know, I mean, that was real. And he kept the team, and again, ran it pretty terribly until 2006. But then in 2006, like I said, I'm embarrassed. Never lost at anything like a competitive setting before. And he started investing. And Dayton Moore and Kevin Ulick, the VP of business, kind of helped show him, you know, here's how successful teams have done it. Here's our lane. But I think he deserves a lot of credit. He's like the easiest person to criticize. You know, like nobody really defends David Glass, but I think he deserves a lot of credit, not just for keeping the team here, but again, investing enough that they won the World Series. And I think the most important thing he did was find that guy to buy it. And if what we have heard about John Sherman is true, he's a perfect guy. And so not only like the Ewing Kauffman through line, you know, from Ewing Kauffman kind of handpicked David Glass in some ways. I know there's twists and turns, but wanted David Glass. Now David Glass, sort of with similar priorities, is choosing John Sherman. It's a pretty incredible thing. Like 51 years after Ewing Kauffman kind of started the team, now they're led by another guy that, you know, shares that same vision. It's a pretty cool deal.
Two real quick questions. How much did Glass pay for the Royals?
$96 million.
And what did Forbes estimate their value at today?
$1
billion. So nice little return
Yep.
on the investment.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, yes. So I'd like for you to put on your pretend hat. At the end of this baseball season, MLB comes to all three of you and wants you to become the commissioner. So I'd like to get your thoughts on what you would do to raise the profile of the sport, not just the individual athletes, but the sport, and how you would move forward to make changes to get the young people interested in baseball, because I really enjoy it. Thanks.
I think it's a great question. Want to start, Vahe?
No, I don't want to start because I think Sam's going to have a better notion of this. My only thought is, though, we have seen movement and consciousness in the last 10, 12, 15 years of the need for replenishing the game at the youth level. And what I'm unclear on, I think Sam does know this better, I think you do too, Blair, is what we have right here in town, just how effective the Urban Youth Academy, for instance, has been. I can't tell what kind of momentum they've got. And I think you've probably talked to Dayton more recently about it than I have. I'm not sure about that.
At one point, I was going to have a story that was going to run today about that, and then John Sherman blew up my plan.
The timetable.
For the last couple of weeks. But I think there's some real momentum there, and I think that was the first thing that, now I'm losing where you're sitting, but wherever you are, that, oh, there you are. No, like that was the first thing that popped in my head when you said that of kind of replenishing the sport is, it's been lost in a lot of ways in some urban areas. And I think that there's other sort of forms of the Urban Youth Academy in other cities, but I've heard from people in other markets, like this is the one that people are starting to want to copy. Like this is, you know, the Royals have put baseball operations people in charge of this, and they are treating it not like a charity, but a real thing that can produce, you know, not just, you know, good outcomes for people who want to work in sports, not just players, but, you know, scouts or, you know, coaches or whatever, but maybe some players, and to grow popularity of the sport. Lincoln Prep is playing the first softball game of any interscholastic league school in at least 40 years tonight. That's why I was going to write the story today. But and that's a direct line from the Urban Youth Academy. You know, there's other things I think they could do. Like I think that the Royals don't maximize the value of, this is a small thing, but that gorgeous, huge video board that they have. I think that you could run like 2 screens at once horizontally, and like on a highlight play, like one shows, the guy diving to make the play, and the other one shows like the dugout's reaction. Just like little things like that can kind of try and bring people closer to the game. I think that's where it's at. But it's a great point, because I love baseball too, and I want my kids to play it, and I hope it's popular when when they're adults, that they can show their kids and all that. So these are important issues, I think, at least to people like us that love the game.
Well, one idea we can't escape is that baseball has become just more of a regional game than the national game that we remember it as when we were young. I used to live for the game of the week. I knew who was playing. I knew everybody on every team. I had baseball. That's just the way we reacted to baseball. We don't react to baseball. Young people don't react to baseball that way. Maybe the best example of that is World Series television ratings, which are rival any NFL weekend of games rated higher than a World Series game, which it's kind of astounding, actually. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We've been very long time subscribers of the Kansas City Star, and we've always been very, very impressed with the journalism there and the writing and the quality that you all bring to the paper. My question is, as a longtime subscriber, I always open up the sports page. Don't follow the sports that much, I must admit. But part of that is because with the Star, I never really see any women on that front page. The big picture at the front and the articles on the front never seem to really touch on any sort of women involved in the sports. So my question is that because women aren't interested? Or are they not interested because the stories aren't there? I mean, what's the dynamics of that?
Yeah.
Well,
it's a great question.
It is a good question. It's a really good
another
question.
Hour.
You can, and she's asking the 3 guys up there.
I know, right?
I kind of don't know where to start. I would remind that the Chiefs have been covered for the last year and a couple of months by a woman, Brooke Pryor, who we were fortunate to get and has done a wonderful job covering the Chiefs for us. Maybe we should have put her column mug on the page more, but Brooke Pryor is one of our most important beats at the newspaper. And before her, we had Maria Torres cover the Royals for us. We've had women reporters there, but in terms of just coverage of events and maybe photographs, I know Vahe spent a few days at the U.S. Gymnastics Championships last month now in early August, and I hope that we gave the Women's World Cup a good run. I will say we're conscious of that. We are. We do think about these ideas, and we talk about them as well. But I think you're onto something when you suggest or when you ask, does the interest warrant the coverage, or should the coverage promote interest? So we ask ourselves that a lot. I don't know the answer. Don't know what the right answer is. We used to have, before Vahe was here, Sam, you were here, we used to have a woman, a journalist who was dedicated to women's sports. She covered all the women's WNBA finals, the U.S. Open, women's U.S. Open, tennis, women's tennis. We'd in staff reductions, and I'll share a little math with you. At the peak of the Star's circulation and financial height and all that, there were 50 people who worked in the sports department, and there's 12 now. So there were some reductions and cuts obviously in the last decade. So I'm rambling, trying to come up with a good answer, hoping something comes to me that's more than what I've offered, but I can't.
The one thing I would say is I do think we try to stay cognizant of opportunities to write about different things altogether, but also I think we're conscious for sure of trying to write about women's sports. But in the routine of what we're doing so often now, typically we have 4 or 5 of us at every Chiefs game. We're in sort of a swarm mode on specialty things that way, and with the fewer staff, it's less opportunity. But I think when the events, for instance, when we've been at the Olympics, I would suggest we have as much women's coverage at Olympics as we've had men's coverage, because I think the opportunities are there. We also lost FC Casey when we had a team here. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question to any degree better, but try to stay cognizant of it.
Well, I think Vahe does a great job. Like pretty much every year, the Win KC event you've covered. There was a story. I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but I think I saw this. I think it was Alex Morgan, the soccer player for the U.S. national team, and she said like she wanted to be a player. She wanted to play soccer after seeing, I think, Abby Wambach, and I might be getting the names mixed up, but the point remains that she saw that role model, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at, right? That she saw that person as a kid. It inspired her to be the person she is now. 1,000,000% she's inspiring kids, now to be her later. The part of what Vahe, I think, is referring to too is like, now we can measure who's reading our stuff in a way that has never been possible before, and how long and from where and all those things. And those metrics, now more than ever, we kind of have to be guided by what people are interested. So, whichever that chicken and egg, that's kind of where we have to be focused. But I do think, I know that we're always open and searching on some levels for great stories of all roads.
Blair, we'll make this the last question.
Okay, last question.
Well, you were talking about the decline of the Royals this year, and I think it was kind of culminated today. Their starting pitcher giving up 3 consecutive home runs. A batting pitcher coach doesn't give up 3 home runs. But anyway, my question is, do you think that one of the legacies that Glass will have is the fact of putting the team in the hands of a good owner? And is this something that might have been planned 4 or 5 years ago? When why would a guy in the gas business buy an interest in a Cleveland team?
I've certainly wondered that if when he did that, this was him sort of trying to get his footing for something like this. But I don't think our headlights go that far yet on how far back this might have gone.
There was a Jeffrey Flanagan, former Star Sports writer, now covers the Royals for Royals.com, had the first public comments from David Glass. I posted yesterday, I think
so,
or
yeah.
maybe today. Anyway, and there was a part in there where he said that John had approached him 4 years ago, whatever, about buying the team, and nope, they're not for sale. And then he, Plan B, goes and buys, I think, about 30% of the Indians. This is a little bit of hindsight, but the so reverse engineering. But I do think that this makes sense. We had been trying to find the succession plan for David Glass. This is a story that 4 different beat writers at the Star have been trying to get to, and we never could. I asked all kinds of people. I don't know was the answer. I don't know. David Glass would never say it. I think this was always the succession plan, because if the succession plan was Dan, his son, the club president for 20 years, that makes sense. Why not just say that? That is, stability, and you're going forward. So I think he always had something like this in mind. Again, this through line from Ewing Kauffman into the future. And I think, it's a little bit soundbitey. Like David Glass will say, I was looking for the perfect guy. I was looking for the guy to lead the team into the future. But I think he found that guy. And if he found him a year ago, it would have been a year ago. If he found him 2 years from now, it would have been 2 years from now. But I think that was the purpose.
Steve, can I say one last thing?
Yes.
I just wanted to thank everybody for being here and for supporting Reading the Star in any way that you do. Consume it, whether it's digitally or the print product. And if you enjoyed this, we actually do this about once a week now on a podcast, Sports Beat KC. I think we're the only newspaper in the country that has a daily sports podcast. And I think these guys appear on it 3 times a week, exclusively, twice or once a week, we have the columnists in, and then we have post-game Chiefs game, and then midweek we talk Chiefs as well. So thank you so much for consuming the product, and that is how the Kansas City Star and all newspapers are going to stay in business.
And just a quick word to the lady who asked the question about the women's sports coverage. Journalists, including these guys I know, pride themselves on asking the tough questions. I really enjoyed watching them have the tables turned on them on us.
Squirm a little bit.
These guys don't have a lot of spare time. I really appreciate them giving us their spare time this evening, and I hope you guys did as well. Thank you guys
Thanks,
very
Steve.
much.
Thank you.